All right, so Prime Minister, whenever you're ready, you can start.
Okay, I'll start in three, two, one. So Amor Fati is defined as like a mindset in which someone accepts things that have happened and sees them as things that were necessary in order to like improve or things necessary in your life for you to like appreciate life more or whatever. Um, so essentially what this narrative looks like is that number one, people understand that there are certain things out of one's control, right? Like Amor Fati is the practice of accepting and embracing everything that has happened and is happening. Like you see life experiences as something necessary and good, right? Whether like what actually happens is good or bad or like you enjoyment or it's suffering or loss, it is necessary in order for you to like gain more exposure or to improve, right? So it's and you're not viewing things as simply bad luck, and you're welcoming all experiences as things that will improve you as a person. So it is the understanding that the nature of your universe is changing, and without change, we would not exist, right? Like our relationship would not exist. We would not like laugh, cry, love, create, or grow. We would not experience any of these things. So it's the mindset that you like embrace things that happen as it helps you make the best out of anything that happens in your life. It empowers you to essentially cultivate an attitude of acceptance. Essentially what the goal of today's debate for both sides should be which side can increase happiness and allow people to be more accepting and successful in life in general, right? So I would like to start with our first argument about how it helps you control and regulate your responses to life's bad events. So with life's bad events, a lot of the times, like they were occurred by things that were out of your control, right? And like fate, right? It's defined as like things that are out of your control. So like by accepting things that were out of your control, you're accepting like that okay, what I couldn't control happened the way it happened, and I can't blame myself for things that I couldn't have controlled anyways. So essentially the what a result of this is that you make the best out of everything that happens, right? You're willing to face the things that you experienced and like show that like it challenged you or it helped you learn perseverance or and why this mindset is so important is because you learn to view everything as positive, as like either a learning experience or an experience that was necessary, right? And overall this is good essentially because it allows just like with acceptance in general, it doesn't leave people hung up on things that make them like essentially extremely sad all the time and like an unproductive like blaming of external factors or unproductive sadness within oneself, right? And obviously that's a good thing. And now moving on to our second point about self-awareness and acceptance and how that leads to improvement, right? So um, instead of blaming others or thinking that you have bad luck, right? One has the understanding that these things were out of your control and they were necessary steps. It was a necessary step to make in order to improve or decrease the chance of bad luck impacting you next time. So I'll explain this through an example, which is like, for example, if you fail a math competition. So without Amor Fati, one may blame your bad performance on maybe how you were feeling that day, or you have a bad teacher, or the questions just weren't familiar with you, and you go all out of your way to blame like the math institution for picking these questions, blame the competition, blaming things out of your control. However, with Amor Fati, you recognize that this type of failure, it was a necessary step to understand the things that you should do in a math competition, right? Like understand that, oh, okay, so what happened here was that I didn't come prepared, and which means that I can come prepared next time. You see, I didn't study enough the night before, but that was a necessary step to show me what I had to do the night before of like an exam, right? And instead, with Amor Fati, you can it's like you're blocking out the blame that you feel towards external factors and solely onto things that are within your control. And these things and this type of self-recognition is what leads to self-improvement. Because like the impact of this is that one person would just analyze how a combination of things out of your control and a combination of things within your control led to something that happened, and like you allow people to accept things and see the areas to improve in areas within your control and just move on. They focus on self-improvement instead of dwelling on the past, which is like obviously a good thing. But before I move on to further explain this, does anyone have a POI?
POI?
Yes.
Okay, so the line of thinking that if you get into a math class unprepared, the Amor Fati kind of comforts you, but this kind of contradicts itself because Amor Fati shifts the blame from internal factors such as I came unprepared into factors such as fate told me
Out of order.
to be
Time's up for the POI.
Okay, so I see where you're going with this. But actually this I think this Amor Fati is actually up to interpretation, and the way that we see it is like fate is defined as like obviously external factors, right? And even if what you said is true, you're still like recognizing, okay, so fate as a whole, like what happened, right? It's like what happened was a result of multiple things, but by eliminating like the such as like bad luck or like for example bad luck and external factors, you are able to at least recognize the things that led you to your like failure or whatever. And essentially in the info slide, it also explains that you see things that happened as at the very least necessary. So necessary for what would generally be improvement, right? Or like self-awareness. Okay, so now that we've cleared that up, I'd like to finally talk briefly about how it helps you move on from traumatic events in your life in a healthy way. So when you understand that things like were meant to happen or that change is a necessary part, you're more likely to move on easier from events that impacted you. For example, like getting dumped or ending a relationship that many people like struggle to move on from. Like many people end up overanalyzing themselves and think that they're the problem, or you end up like being extremely upset and spend a week in bed and not move on, right? It's like a spiral where you analyze every single one of your actions or your surroundings. But however, when you follow this belief of Amor Fati, it helps you move on to this because there's you have the understanding that it was a necessary step. Like maybe you just weren't right for each other, or like it was a necessary step to better yourself and better like your standards, or find someone better in the future, right? So overall, I've proven to you why this motion should definitely stand. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks so much, PM. Now calling on Leader of Opposition, please.
Hi, can I confirm if I'm audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Okay, great. So for formalities, hi, I'm Kimberly Ko, your leader of opposition for today. She, her pronouns only, so please refer to me as such. And my POI preference is through voice. All right. Okay, I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Chair, from the entirety of PM's speech, the only thing we hear from side government's case is contradictions. Now, since she failed to characterize the stakeholders in this debate, along with give us any solid framework, let me do that for you. Okay, so what is our main stakeholder for this debate? Okay, who are we trying to protect? We tell you, Chair, that we're trying to protect people going through hardships. Okay, we want to make sure that these people, for A, are able to process their emotions, and B, are able to actually address whatever it is they're going through, and C, these people have the sense of control that they're able to do something about it, especially when the pain or the horrible things that are going that are affecting them are being too much. Okay, so who exactly are these people going through hardships? We tell you that there are about 3 people going through these hardships. Firstly, these are people currently experiencing abuse. Secondly, people who need to process trauma or heavy emotions. And lastly, people who are heavily affiliated with Amor Fati. Now, firstly, on the people currently experiencing abuse, these people are negatively affected by Amor Fati because if they act according to its philosophy, they have more of a reason to take in the abuse that they are experiencing with a grain of salt and not try to escape it, because they believe that they are deserving of this pain, or that is something that they should be tolerating. Additionally, if the Amor Fati philosophy is pushed onto an abuse victim, it's likely that they'd feel confusion or even anger, because if instead of being heard, their problems are being shrugged off by people saying that because you're being abused, you should just embrace it. Take it in, despite the fact that you're being hurt regularly, whether physically or emotionally. Now, on to people who need to process trauma. When something horrible and traumatic happens to someone, reflection is key to being able to learn and heal. What do we mean by reflection? When we say reflection, it's not just, oh, it was necessary, oh, it made me stronger, oh, I need to embrace this pain. Reflection means, okay, what happened? It hurt me because blank. This happened because blank, blank, blank. You take the problem in introspection, and you actually try to figure it out instead of simply shrugging it off as something brought to you by fate, right? But when these people who actually need to process trauma, instead of processing it, they just say that, like, oh, it's fate, it's amor fati, then they have less of an incentive to actually twirl the problem around and try to understand it, okay, and try to process it. Therefore, if they're so closely linked to amor fati, then they're never going to be able to fully process this trauma. Now, when you tell people with trauma that, like, they just need to embrace it, or they just need to suffer through it and sit through it, then, like, this again causes so much anger and confusion because they aren't being heard and they aren't being understood. Example. Okay, imagine going to a depressed person who literally opened up to you, told you what they're going through, what they're feeling, and the thoughts going in their head. And instead of being supportive, or instead of trying to help them out, you just say, oh, you know what, you need to embrace the pain. It's gonna make you stronger anyway. Now, that is exactly what we don't want here inside opposition. And lastly, when we talk about people who are heavily affiliated with Amor Fati, like as I mentioned earlier, these are people who instead of processing, or instead of trying to understand, they just put a label and they call it Amor Fati. They call it fate, instead of trying to understand, instead of trying to, like, bring justice to their abuse, instead of trying to do something about the pain that they're feeling. They just call it fate and move on. And we think that this is so detrimental to people, especially people going through hardships, because they're never fully going to get closure, and they're never fully going to be able to move on because they're just going to call it fate and throw everything out the window. Okay, so then we tell you, Chair, that the villain in this debate is obviously not addressing the problem at its root, which is exactly what we see in Amor Fati's belief, especially with how PM defined it. Okay, not addressing the problem at the root, as I mentioned earlier, is so harmful because you're never gonna get anything done. You're never gonna escape that abusive household. You're never going to grow and learn if you don't address it and you don't just call it fate. You know what? I'll take it. Go.
Aren't abusers inherently extremely manipulate and often gaslight their victims, which always is going to exist on your side of the house?
Okay, so here's the thing. You say that, like, these manipulators are going to these abusers are manipulating them. Exactly, which is why if you, like, bring the Amor Fati belief along with this, it's so detrimental. Because if someone else is already telling you, oh, this is all in your head, oh, you're not experiencing this, and then you also tell yourself, you know what? It's not, this pain, it's fine. Okay, then you have two voices shrugging it off, both your own voice and an outside voice, which is going to make it so much worse, or going to make solving the problem so much harder. So then what is our goal here in this debate? Okay, our goal here is to determine where people are most able to resolve and cope with their issues. And our burden is to prove that Amor Fati pushes unnecessary pain onto people that harms them on the long run, with the burden of the government team to it being to prove that Amor Fati is capable of bringing comfort and solution in times of crisis despite all its harms. So a couple of rebuttals. Firstly, they say that people will be accepting. Okay, accepting and perceiving everything as good are not the same. Okay, people are more likely to be deceived than being abused made you a better person. But what if that situation was something that you could have prevented? Okay, you could have prevented something, but because of the Amor Fati belief, you weren't able to. Okay, they also say that, like, blaming things out of control without Amor Fati. Okay, this is a problematic because we need to realize when a situation can be prevented or not. We need to realize when a situation can be prevented or not. There are two situations, panel. Situations that you can control, being with Amor Fati, you don't have accountability when you didn't prepare for an outcome, which was preventable, and you believe that it's fate's way of saying that you deserve this outcome is a lazy excuse. Okay, and secondly, situations without control. These are situations like someone kidnapping or being abused. Okay, example. But we think that these situations, Amor Fati, is dangerous because you do not try to escape your harmful reality, right? So I have one running out of time. One argument for you today. Okay, firstly, it prevents people from enacting change in their life. Okay, so people have no incentive to try to change something that they deem is necessary and even good. This directly crashes with the assertion that proposition brings when they say that they'll make the best out of everything, because they'll be less likely to go on and try to change their life when something bad is going on, simply because they believe that they deserve the bad thing. Now, my partner will be expounding on this later on. All right. For all these reasons and more, side opposition. Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much, LO. Now calling on DPM.
Can I confirm that I am audible and visible? Sorry, the light here is like really bad, but yeah.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah. All good.
Okay. I will be starting my speech in 3.
Sorry, before you start, how would you like POIs to be raised?
Oh,
during
sorry.
your speech?
Verbal, please. I won't be looking at the chat. Sorry. Thanks for reminding me. I will be beginning my speech in 3, 2, 1. When opposition comes up and narrows this debate into stakeholders, when it's literally a this house supports motion about philosophy, we think that they have already lost this debate on so many counts. A few things before I begin my speech. First, I'll be rebutting most of what the first speaker has mentioned. Second, I'll be recharacterizing what Amor Fati looks like and what exactly it would like a person who follows it would do. And thirdly, I'll be bringing in a new point about how it helps you be more appreciative of the conditions and environment you bring. So first, they tell you that the stakeholders in this debate that they protect are people who are going through hardships. They tell you that these are people who are experiencing abuse and they are negatively affected. Firstly, this isn't a stakeholder debate, so they don't really get to narrow this down into people who are only being negatively affected. If we do that, we can tell you about why exactly like people who are there's like a select group of people who are going to be so benefited by this. But we don't narrow that debate. We tell you on our case about how Amor Fati is able to affect people on a wider scale. People like who aren't going through abuse. We're not saying that these people aren't important, but that like in a debate, when we weigh who has the major impact, we tell you that on proposition we get it more because we are able to benefit a larger amount of people. Now to rebut their claim about how they're going to like want to accept this abuse. On op side, they think that like it's their fault. They think that it's something they've done wrong. Abusers are inherently extremely manipulative. They're gaslighting, and we don't think this mindset is something that comes from Amor Fati. It happens even in opposition's work because abusers always tell you that it's your fault, that you did something wrong, and this is like your punishment or something. So at least on our side, how are we able to benefit? At least these people won't be blaming themselves, but will still be looking for help because they want to understand how to avoid these horrible people and prevent things like this afterwards. I'll take you later. Opposition says that Amor Fati limits action. When they say it's incredibly assertive because you see other actions being taken. Like for example, when a door closes, when you see these things happen, when a door closes, you see another one open, and that's what Amor Fati helps you do, to identify that other door that opened when something else closed. We think that like it happens in a more retrospective way, not in the middle of a hardship that doesn't fall in the category of fate. You look back at things that happened and recognize that some things were out of your control, such as fate, and accept it. Now, how are you going to make and then you think about like how you can make these things that were out of your control in your control again. Also, this debate is on the metric of happiness that occurred when people on a wider scale follow Amor Fati, not on like a select group of people, because that's like the core of philosophy. So if someone accepts things and doesn't cry at reminders of past us, we think we've already proved this. We think we've already proved why we win today's debates. Also, opposition doesn't have any arguments. It's just 100% rebuttals that are completely focused on a specific group of people within this debate. Okay, I'll take your POI now.
You literally contradict yourself. That's Amor Fati telling people that they deserve the bad thing, telling people that whatever bad thing is happening to them is something they need.
That's something I'll recharacterize later in my speech. Amor Fati doesn't tell you that you deserve pain. It tells you that this pain is necessary for you to grow as a person. They're two completely separate things, and opposition can't just like assert that they're the same thing without any mechanization to prove this otherwise. So what does Amor Fati then actually look like? 5 things. First, people who often follow Amor Fati look to strive virtuously. They're often overly optimistic, but they understand that there's something you can control, and there's something that you can't control, which is fate. But when the things you can control it to your most degree. Don't fight your fate, which is things out of control. Embrace the results of things that can happen. This doesn't mean embracing abuse. This means embracing the fact that you're out of your abuse, that now there are things you can control. For example, getting justice for yourself and trying to get your abuser in your jail. They also tell you that there's always be happy now, and that's something that's really necessary, because it's sure, we shouldn't tell a depressed person to be happy, but we should help a depressed person identify moments in their life that are important for them, that they can help live happily. So that's what Amor Fati looks like. That's a recharacterization that I really shouldn't have done, but apparently opposition took it the wrong way. Now, an extension on how it helps you be more appreciative of the conditions and environment in your life. It helps you understand which events to avoid and which mistakes you often make, because instead of glossing everything as unimportant, you see them as necessary steps for them to improve, for you to be able to live a better life. Because as my first speaker had said, when you're no longer able to blame other things or etc. like yourself, you're going to think about how exactly this thing was necessary in your journey to becoming a better person. You're more grateful towards things because you're able to see it in a clear domino effect, the ways in which they helped you grow and change. Amor Fati helps people understand that when you resist or hate or complain about fate, you resist conditions that have given you life and experiences. You see that these environments and people, for example, your family, have given you your history was necessary were necessary steps in order to lead up to that moment of happiness, that you couldn't have gotten that happiness if you hadn't been through these experiences or encountered these people or the conditions in which you grew up in. Without that history, without your family, without the people and the conditions you are grateful for, you would not have felt that happiness, and that's something you understand when you follow Amor Fati. So what more likely happen in the case is that you're more appreciative and more grateful towards these people that have given you the experience and conditions necessary for you to be able to feel that moment of accelerating happiness. Therefore, you show appreciation. You view things more positively with Amor Fati. That even if something is maybe your fate, you view it as something that you can get over it. That obstacles aren't that different to pass through, because there's a way to pass through it, because that's fate. Okay, now a summary of what exactly, and weighing the two cases that we've seen right now. So on proposition, we give you 3 points. First, on how it helps you control and regulate your response to life bad events. Why is this important? This is important because we are able to help people who are because people aren't perfect. There's a way for them to improve. And when you are just blaming on external factors, you don't understand that there's a way for you to improve. But on the other hand, when on the propositions world, people won't be hung up on things that are out of their control. They're able to view things in a more positive light. They're able to see that, for example, when you lose your job, that's not the end of the world. There are other jobs out there that you can help get. When we are able to benefit a larger scale of people, not just on opposition side, where they only benefit the small group of people who have been abused, we think that we win this debate simply because we're able to provide more positive impact. We're able to make the lives of many more stakeholders in today's debate far happier. And since this is a debate on philosophy and the metric of happiness, we think that we win on so many grounds. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, TPM. Now calling on Yellow.
Hi there, just getting my timer. Pronouns are she and her. I'll take my POI through audio, but I'll allot time for your POI, so please do not raise it until I say so. Can I confirm if my audio is clear?
Yep, all good.
Awesome, thank you so much. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel, deceiving yourself is not the same as acceptance, and we say that this does not lead to appreciation or all the benefits that proposition is trying to go up. Chair, I will accomplish three things in my speech. Number one, respond to the other bench. Number two, provide an extension to our case. And lastly, prove why our world outweighs the benefits more than the harms. On to responsiveness. Responses. Number one, they said that we are narrowing this debate as we are only talking about specific people. What we tried to do earlier is mention to you the impact of Amor Fati on certain individuals, because we are not only looking at rational people over here, and we think that the harms outweigh the only benefit that proposition is trying to assert, which is that people will appreciate life and that they will be more happy. What's our trade-off? If we can save one person from being deceived or being um unaccountable of what they did, then we think it is a higher purpose that we should not support a more fati. Because if the only trade-off is that people are more happier or appreciate their suffering, we think that it's more harmful when people are actually deceived when they're in an abusive relationship, or that when they are suffering. So we think that this is more important, more than saving 10 people who could be sad in a certain situation. Number two, they said that when a door closes, another one opens. Chair, realize that it is this mindset that lets multiple people die with a million regrets. When you spend your time twiddling your thumbs waiting for a door to open, you're wasting your time. In situations such as abuse, where you can be harmed constantly, simply taking the blows regardless of the situation does nothing. A more fatigue does only fuel to the fire, because you're letting them to continue doing what they do because you think that's a good thing, that's not a problem. That's what's problematic with this philosophy. But thirdly, government's world lets you learn and grow. That's what they painted to us. Panel, realize you cannot learn and grow by simply shrugging off your problems and deceiving yourself that these things are good. On government's world, you blame everything on fate, which does not let you learn anything, which does not let you be accountable for something that you could have prevented, because all the factors are just shrugged off. And fourthly, we'd like to point out that government is trying to talk about people who they seem to think that people are always rational. They frame that people will only think that everything is necessary to make you a better person. But no, the impact of Amor Fati is that people will think that everything is good. And there's many kinds of people. There are people who cannot process what they feel. There are people who are not always rational, and that they will just perceive Amor Fati as oh, everything is good. Everything is good. Even the bad is good. It's not always just being necessary. There's no likelihood that people will just think that this is just necessary, because as you believe in this philosophy, you get numb to it, and you just become numb to the situation and continue believing this. All right. So moving forward, what is our burden to win? If I prove to you that it is more important for us to stop one person from being deceived and being raped, being abused, then I think that we're able to make the case of proposition fall. Okay, so I already told you the trade-off that we are willing to take, and the other house needs to answer why their benefits are actually better than the harms that we have already stated to you. All right, please pause my timer. I'm lagging so bad. Okay, all right. Starting my speech and resuming in 3, 2, 1. On my first extension, we think that with Amor Fati, it is more likely that there is no avenue for support. What does this mean? People will ignore each other's pain through this philosophy. What is the effect on society? When the general public starts to embrace Amor Fati, support groups are less likely to be helpful, or just empathy in general. We think people are more likely to be numb when they believe that everything is good. You don't need my support because you're already in a good place. People has no ups. They lose this perception that there are bad things, that there are things that people need support in. You lose this kind of empathy and you just ignore problems. So if support groups even exist on government side, we tell you panel that Amor Fati would actually keep people from being able to support or receive support because they will think that they don't need it. If a person that needs support but is so tightly linked to Amor Fati decides to get therapy or join a support group, which is heavily unlikely, then believing that everything is simply fate and everything should be embraced instead of letting it go, instead of healing from it, then we think that nothing happens and they don't grow.
UI.
I'll take that later. Additionally, if the support group or therapists themselves are the ones being closely linked to Amor Fati, then the person that they're supposed to be helping won't get any actual help. These are likely situations because we are talking about people who are already saturated with Amor Fati. As my LO said earlier, telling a depressed person to embrace their depression is detrimental because you're not fixing the problem. Instead, you are just making yourself numb to the problem. All right, I'll take a POI before my second argument.
How are you supposed to move on from things like from traumatic events if you always constantly fixate on what you could have done to change it or avoid?
All right, you don't need Amor Fati for that. We already do that in status quo as human beings. What we do is assess what we did wrong and be better. We don't need to deceive ourselves to think that, oh, something when I failed this test, um, that's just fate saying that that was a good thing. The problem is people do not act on your side. There's no accountability. They don't assess their actions anymore. That's why it's so problematic. But we also think, on my argument, we believe it prevents people from enacting change in their life. So when you're in an abusive relationship, people don't try to change. So we think that Amor Fati, because of Amor Fati, an individual is more likely to be in an abusive relationship. And opposition can say that hardships will allow people to grow because in order for people to grow, they need to process a hardship and accept it as a trial that they went through. This is called healing and acceptance, not deceiving yourself. So that does not change the fact that they are being abused, which is why we think we outweigh the benefits of our world because we do not deceive ourselves. We act on our mistakes and we actually grow, and the general public is catered to. For all these reasons, very proud to oppose.
All right, thank you so much, DLO. Now calling on GovWhip.
Okay, so can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so wait a second. I prefer POIs verbally. And my speech will begin now. So today in my speech, I'll be going over two main clashes. Firstly, which side is able to allow actually people to actually change and improve their situation, the difficult situations they may be in. And secondly, on which side are people actually able to find sort of fulfillment and not just continuously dwell in the past. So firstly, under the first class, which side is able to actually allow people to change and have this sort of better growth mindset. So firstly, what opposition tells us, right? Their main point is that Amor Fati will prevent people from enacting change in their lives and like that people will believe that, for example, they deserve something bad that happened to them. We tell you that firstly, opposition wrongly characterizes and understands what Amor Fati really looks like, right? It's not thinking that everything that bad happened to you is something you deserve because like you did something bad or like everything is your fault, right? It doesn't mean blaming everything on you or blaming everything on fate. It looks more like thinking everything is necessary for you, and not only necessary but something that is necessary in order to help you change and is an event that like is able to help better yourself, right? It's not just negatively blaming yourself on everything that might have happened. We tell you that on opposition side, it's more likely for people to blame themselves for things out of their control because some things are like, as they characterize, there are things that are going to be out of their control. And we think that on opposition side, it's more likely people will continuously dwell in the past and things that they might have done wrong, right? At least on our side, we tell you that firstly, people will understand that something is necessary, right? It's not like thinking that, oh, this is fate and it was meant to happen. It's more like thinking that something is meant to help us learn and like something, this thing that happened is meant to help us become stronger and not just simply like letting it go, right? And we tell you that they also then tell us that, for example, like people who like face abuse or depression will view it as like necessary, right? We think that firstly, like people will still seek change even if they feel like something that happened is necessary, right? They still want to like seek change in the future and be able to like get themselves out of this situation. And we tell you that on our side, instead of fixating these people, fixating themselves on how they could have avoided an abusive relationship, or because when people have these bad things happen to them, they will have this mindset that everything happened because it was their fault, and it was all on you, right? And I didn't do something to like prevent it. And even if it was true that this was a preventable situation, we think that dwelling on the past is not really something that is really going to help these people, right? And we tell you that on our side, people will still be thinking about what they could do better because they think that this is something necessary and this is something good, but I could still do something to help me change and be better in the future, right? And we think that on our side, we're able to actually understand that these things are necessary and you're able to actually focus on a more positive future and create better change. We think that also this exists on status quo, right? You see people who are still being manipulated by their, like in the status quo, there will still be people who like view abuse as like necessary, right? People are going to be manipulated by their abusers into thinking that they deserve like their abuser, and they deserve what happened to them, or it was something that like they would never be able to change. And only on our world through Amor Fati we actually are able to counter this sort of detrimental effect. Okay, so we tell you that this like also as well, like when people see that something like abuse is really harmful, it's not that because you have
TUI.
Amor Fati, you're just going to, I'll take you later, you're just going to think that this is something good and continue to like allow yourself to be harmed, right? People will still have this sort of consciousness and know that they can do something to prevent it. At least they won't be continue fixating themselves on like what they could have done. Lastly, under the first clash, they tell us that like some situations that were preventable and Amor Fati is not a lazy excuse, right? We think that it is necessary, which means that it's necessary for you to become an advocate, for example, against sexual abuse, right? Amor Fati is a mindset that allows you to face obstacles or negative events with a more positive attitude and accept things for what they are, right? And we tell you that even if people don't change they simply accept failure, at least they're accepting their past and like know that they aren't unhappy about it, right? They will at least like feel not really be dwelling on the past. And like we would rather people be happy or instead of being hung up on failure, right? Even if people are deceiving themselves, we think that at least they're able to see things positively, and that like you're no longer blaming things that are out of your and things that might have happened. And I'll take your pronoun.
Okay, so saying this hardship is necessary for me to learn is literally synonymous to I deserve this hardship because I needed to grow. So your stance is contradictory.
Okay, it's not okay. Seeing it's more like not just not blaming yourself, because if you see that this is something that was necessary for me to learn, or at least this is something that was out of my control, it's better than saying that this is something that happened because it was all my fault, which is going to happen on your side, because everyone is going to view these negative events only negatively and not actually having any sort of positive attitude at all. So this brings me to my second clash, which is which side is able to actually increase happiness and allow people to have a more positive mindset. So we tell you that on our side, we're able to allow people to actually appreciate, especially there's not only like bad things, right? Amor Fati also applies to things like positive things, and we actually allow people to be more grateful and actually appreciate these moments, right? On opposition side, they tell us that they might like lose empathy for people or something as their second extension. Amor Fati isn't going to change the way society views issues, right? Like no one is going to look at abuse or rape and say, oh, that's good, or like you deserve it. We think that Amor Fati is thinking that events are necessary and good for yourself, right? For example, a traumatic event can help you grow as a person and become more assertive or stronger. And it doesn't mean that people will view bad things like good anymore, or people will stop like asking for help. People aren't going to also stop extending empathy to people who have been abused. Rather, they're more likely to extend more empathy when Amor Fati exists, because they see the way in which these people move on as something admirable, right? And something that they were strong enough to do. Opposition lastly ignores the fact that, like, for example, social movements such as Me Too exist in the world and are constantly advocating for things like victim blaming. And can help these people overcome traumatic events and extend sympathy. So it's simply unrealistic for them to say that with this Amor Fati like mindset, people who are being abused are not going to seek more help, because that is not really true. And we tell you that on our side, on like life without Amor Fati, a lot of people are just going to view things a lot more negatively, and you're going to think that every single external factor is your fault. And I'm so proud to.
All right. Thank you so much, GovWhip. Upwhip, please.
Hello. Let me just get my timer ready. I'll be ready in a second. Okay. Can I clarify that I'm audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Okay. So just a disclaimer. It kind of was like raining super hard here before. So in case I cut out, kindly pause the timer and just let me know through chat or message one of my teammates here. Okay. So Ethan, opposition whip, POIs through voice. Though I'll be declining all POIs until the 5th to 6th minute. So if you have a POI and I decline it, I'll take it within the 5th to 6th minute and I'll raise a section anyway. So consider all your POIs declined to the 5th to 6th minute. Pronouns he. Okay. Okay, starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Proposition would rather deceive themselves and say this was good and this was necessary. They would rather deceive others and tell them your hardship, it was good. It was necessary for you to grow. They immediately lose this debate because everything they've shown us thus far only allows them to shoot themselves in the foot because they make themselves out to sound like the abuser that opposition side literally wants to get away from. So I have 2 questions that determine which side wins this debate, and I'll be properly weighing the clashes. So essentially, question 1 is on which side allows a person to better grow and overcome previous mistakes or trauma, and number 2, on which side are people likely to change their situation, right? So a couple of rebuttals before I get into that. Number 1, they have a problem solution mismatch. For you to accept something and heal from a traumatic experience such as a job loss, sorry, pause my timer a bit. I'll just close this window because it's getting really loud. Okay, great. Sorry, restarting my timer in 3, 2, 1. Okay, so to repeat it again, for you to accept something, for you to accept a traumatic experience and genuinely heal from it, you should not tell yourself that it was necessary. Because if you felt like it was necessary, then why would you try to overcome it? That's the thing that proposition does not realize. For example, again, just to paint the picture, you're in a company, you're doing well, and your boss is treating you nicely. Why will you try to get away from the boss who's treating you nicely? Why will you try to change your life if you felt like your life was doing good for you? If you felt like your life was going right and you felt like everything in your life was good, why will you try to change it? Therefore, on proposition side, where they feel like everything is either good or necessary, why would you try to get rid of something that you feel like is necessary? Again, just to paint a picture, if you feel like one of your goals in life is to, I guess, lose weight, then obviously you're willing to take the hardship that is exercise, that is discipline. You will not try to get rid of things that you feel are good and necessary if you felt like they were good and necessary, because by definition, things that are good and necessary, we need those. Those are good things, and those are things that will benefit us. So I don't get Pop's assumption that you're gonna better move on from things. You're gonna better deal with your trauma because you're not gonna deal with it at all in proposition side. Because if the only thing you tell yourself is that this trauma was good and that I needed this trauma to grow, then why would you try to overcome it? You're just gonna live with it, which we believe is a very detrimental thing. The trade-off we are willing to take is we would rather a person reanalyze their decision, even in the worst case where they view it in a negative light. We're okay with viewing something that was negative as something that was negative instead of deceiving ourselves that something negative was in fact a good thing. We would rather believe that a bad thing was a bad thing than a bad thing was a good thing, which is what proposition here wants us to do. Being sad allows us to avoid similar scenarios in the future. If we believe that we shouldn't have been sad in the first place because the thing that happened to us was good, again, just to paint a better picture, if someone made you happy, if you felt like someone made you happy, you would try to replicate that situation. If you felt like being with friends made you happy, you would try to be with friends more often, right? If nothing ever made if nothing if you felt like nothing ever was bad for you, then you would not try to avoid, or you are less likely to try to avoid anything. You would accept anything that comes your way because you would think that's good and I need that to grow. We cannot do that with Amor Fati because you are likely to become numb to problems. It's more likely that you will not change. Rather, on proposition, people will stay in the harsh environment. Though, with a rose-colored glasses, they would be in the harsh environment. They would still suffer, but they won't know that they're suffering. Question 1. On which side allows a person to better grow? Proposition has this assumption, again, like I've stated countless times, that if you view something in a positive lens, no matter what it is, you will grow from it because you will overcome it. But the thing that I keep saying, and my partners have been
What?
saying so far is, later I'll take you in the fifth minute. The thing that my partners and I have been saying so far is, why will you try to move on from something that you believe is necessary? If you believe that it shouldn't have been traumatic for the case that it was good in the first place, why would you try to deal with it? You won't, because if you they say like they give us this picture of getting kicked out of your job. With Amor Fati, it allows you to move on and get a better job quick and get a different job quickly. But no, when you get kicked out of your job with Amor Fati, this is how the narrative works. You'll tell yourself, getting kicked out was a good thing. I needed to get kicked out so that I can grow as a person. They fail to address factors like maybe my boss was bad, that's why I got kicked out. Or maybe I wasn't performing myself and it becomes fate. It was just fate, right? It was just fate that allowed me to get kicked out. This doesn't allow a person to grow whatsoever. Before I move on, POI. 3.
Even if you don't like grow from it or like overcome it, you still at least are no longer hung up on like that failure or traumatic event. What's your response to this?
Okay, so let me paint you a picture. Okay, you've been abused your whole life, and then you just got out of the abuse, let's say a few days ago. Sure, you may think, okay, that whole 20 years of abuse was necessary, therefore you're not hung up on it. However, if you never adjust the fact that you were scarred and that you were hurt and that this abuser didn't need to do those things to you because on the opposition side, you never need to get abused. These bad things never need to happen to innocent people. If you tell yourself that that didn't need to happen to me, you better move on and you better deal with it. You may feel sad initially, but at least you know that should not have happened. On your side, proposition, you say that the abuser was right. He needed to be in my life for me to grow, which we believe is a very gross statement to say. Number 2, on which side are people more likely to change, right? They're not likely to get rid of something and to seek change for something that is good. Again, if you felt like your life was going great, why would you try to change it? If you perceive the abuser to be doing something good, or at least doing something necessary, why will you try to change that situation? We believe as humans are unlikely to change situations that we believe are good and necessary. So, proposition, if you make every situation as good and necessary, therefore you are not likely to change any situation because as humans, you're not likely to change things that are good and necessary. Proposition says, you need this to grow. This is a good thing. This is necessary. These are the literal words of abusers that gaslight the people they're abusing, saying, you need me. I help you grow. This is a good thing. Opposition thus far for all 3 speakers has sounded like the abusers that opposition severely wants to get rid of and severely wants the stakeholders to move on from. For all of these reasons, side with opposition.
All right. Thanks so much, Opposition Whip. Now calling on Opposition Reply.
Hi, please give me a moment to organize my notes. Thank you.
Okay, hi. Can I confirm if I'm audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Perfect. Okay. So I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Chair, comparing both sides of the house, I think we can easily be able to see that side opposition are the victors of this debate. Now, how am I going to be talking about this debate? I'm going to be talking about this debate on two metrics. Firstly, on contribution, and secondly, on engagement. Now, firstly, on contribution, we hear from side opposition, or their main point basically is side proposition. Their main point is basically that Amor Fati lets people have a viewpoint of growth and thankfulness towards their hurt. Now, firstly, on growth, they tell us that embracing pain and telling yourself that you needed pain in order to grow and in order to mature into the person you are now basically leads you to basically leads you to accept and to grow and to learn from whatever happened. But shall we tell you that if you continuously tell yourself that you needed pain, or you need pain, or you need to be hurt, you need to be abused, you needed someone to hurt you in order to be the person that you are now, basically it takes away the agency for you to be able to actually process what happened, and it takes away your ability to actually go, okay, this happened to me, I did not want that to happen, I did not need that, this hurt me, this is affecting me, and until now I'm still being affected. Because when you tell yourself that you needed something in order to grow, in order to be the person you are now, you basically take away all agency you basically take away the ability for yourself to be able to say, I did not want that, that was bad for me, that hurt me a lot, right? But note that we never in our speeches did we discredit like going through something or having pain being able to help you grow. We just discredit the fact that accepting pain or telling yourself that you needed pain to be someone is harmful, right? Secondly, on thankfulness, okay, they tell us that being thankful for your hurt, or being thankful for what you've gone through, basically gives you a better perception of life, right? Or what you went through. But Chair, I think we need to understand that being thankful and actually and actually understanding are two different things. Okay, understanding what happened, as multiple of my speakers have previously said, understanding what actually happened helps you learn, helps you grow, helps you understand. It helps you be a better person. Meanwhile, just simply shrugging it off and saying, oh, thank you for abusing me, thank you for trigger warning, sexually abusing me, does not do anything, right? Meanwhile, it does not do anything. So on being thankful for your hurt, it's just a horrible thing we tell you continuously. Meanwhile, on side opposition, our main contribution to you is that Amor Fati takes away people's ability to process emotions, and it takes away sympathy, especially in large groups. We tell you that processing emotions is imperative to be able to grow and to move on, because as we continuously hear from side proposition, they want you to embrace the pain, they want you to constantly be thankful for it. Meanwhile, we here tell you that we want you to be able to move on from it, that you're not constantly bombarded from it, right? And that's why we tell you that you need to process emotions, and for the reason as I mentioned earlier, you can't do that with Amor Fati. And on taking away sympathy, we tell you, Chair, that with Amor Fati, you take away sympathy from other people because they're unable to understand pain or hurt, because they simply label it as fate. Now, on engagement, proposition basically manipulates the debate on definitions of deserve and necessary. Okay, they were playing on the words in the hopes for us to take the bait, but we will be charitable. Okay, even if it's true that people will perceive that hardships are necessary, proposition still ignores that they are irrational people who will think that they deserve to be abused or lose a job. We say that this is harmful because people stay stagnant and do nothing for a better future. Okay, proposition ignores why they will take this trade-off, and they also do not challenge that this is wrong. Now, for all these reasons and more, side opposition. Thank you.
Great, thanks, op reply. Finally, calling on gov reply.
Okay. I'll begin. Sorry. In 3, 2, 1. So this debate has been extremely messy, where opposition continuously pigeonholes us and strawmans us, saying that we do all these things that we never actually suggested, right? Like, so to clear this up, I would first like to finally clarify, as even though I've mentioned it in my first speech already, what the definition of like fate is, right? Fate is things outside of your control, things that like, even if you tried to fix or change, nothing would have changed, right? So Ott messes this up by saying that fate is just everything that has happened, but actually fate is nothing but events which are outside of your control that happens to us. And we've already explained why having this mindset towards fate, like accepting that some things were out of your control, so you couldn't have changed it anyways. That is a good thing, and not like, oh, I loved what I did in the situation and what happened and things that were out of my control. It's only things that were outside of my control, right? And like in most areas of life, most of the time we do the very opposite of Amor Fati, right? We kick violently against negative events, do not accept their role in our lives. We do not like, we spend a huge amount of time taking stock of our errors, regretting and lamenting the unfortunate twists of fate. And by the way, like it doesn't just include abuse, right? Like we're talking about the general public, how this will affect the general public. And I'm pretty sure like most people aren't abuse victims. And by only focusing on these people, they really like try to keep that, allow that to take hold of their like flimsy case. But actually like typical people, like we want to like alter things like the course of history, like the economy and everything, even though we have a very little amount of power to even be able to do that. And part of this means refusing to be passive about the errors and injustices and ugliness of our own and collective past. So like we at the height of Amor Fati, we recognize that things really could not have been otherwise, because everything we have done is bound closely together in a web of consequences that began with our birth, that we were like inevitably like powerless to alter at will. So like this is what the general public looks like, right? And by having Amor Fati, it's giving these people like at least the idea that, okay, I can understand that like what has happened, and like I could not have controlled like COVID-19 happening in any ways, so I shouldn't like be trying to change that or anything, or like regret it or hate it, which obviously benefits mental health. And okay, so a big part of today's debate, I would like to talk about the people in abuse, right? Like okay, so like even someone who believes in Amor Fati can get out of an abusive relationship, right? Because they can see the past events of abuse as a signal that you should avoid abusive relationships. Like, so things outside of your control are fate, right? But okay, I couldn't control the certain circumstances that led to me ending up in an abusive relationship, but it was necessary for me to understand how to avoid abuse. So if people following Amor Fati don't even have this mindset, as Opposite said, they don't try to get out of the relationship, then why would they even have the incentive to get out of the abusive relationship on Op's side either? Like if they're this shallow-minded, like if they're so passive to the extent that they don't treat these past events as necessary learning opportunities, even through Amor Fati, then they're passive enough to stay in the relationship because they would probably be scared or whatnot. So at least on our side, we give people the comfort of Amor Fati, like instead of the crippling mental health where they're hung up on past events that they couldn't change, they accept them and accept their like past treatment as something that may lead to a greater good. And like if they're happy with this, then let them be happy, right? Because happiness is what matters in a philosophy debate. So and that's what they achieve on our side. So and like finally they said that we're not letting people get over trauma. However, that's not true at all. By looking back at trauma and realizing its impact on yourself, you accept that what happened has happened. It's a method of getting over trauma. And the process of you're processing your emotions in a retrospective way. We're not discouraging that in any way. And like if people are happy with like processing their trauma this way, then they can do it. And if they're happy, then let them do that, right? Like it's as long as they're happy, right? And we tell you that this is what happens on our side. And obviously opposition loses today's debate. Thank you very much.
All right, thanks so much, Gov Reply. Thanks so much, debaters. Let me just stop the recording.